My message today is called A Mostly Peaceful Jesus. And I suspect most of you remember a time here just a few years ago where there were a lot of riots and protests going on. And I saw reporters standing in front of burning buildings, and they were calling it mostly peaceful protest. And I wondered if the building owner thought it was the same thing as a mostly peaceful, as his building burnt to the ground. But as I was considering that, I also considered too how there are so many people today who have what I consider an incorrect perception of Jesus. I will hear people tell me, well, you should be more like Jesus. He never condemned anyone. He was never critical. He just simply loved everyone and accepted them just the way they were. Well, those are nice words, but I suspect that people who say that haven't done much reading in the Gospels, because the Gospels show a Jesus who very much was critical and condemned. And while he did love everyone, his desire was to see them repent. The scriptures I want to read today, first starting off with John 2, verses 13 through 17. And it says, the Passover of the Jews was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. And in the temple he found those who were selling oxen, sheep, and pigeons, and the money changers sitting there. And making a whip of cords, he drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and oxen. And he poured out the coins of money changers and overturned the tables. And he told them who sold the pigeons, take these things away. Do not make my Father's house a house of trade. His disciples remembered that it was written of him, zeal for your house will consume you. Now I'm suspicious that if you get driven out of the temple by a whip, you didn't see Jesus as mostly peaceful. And I think the problem comes is when we try to put the personality of Jesus into one perspective. And I don't think that's fair of a human being, let alone Jesus. And yes, Jesus did teach love and forgiveness. But he also countered societal norms by allowing sinners into his presence and by taking on the people of the religious community and challenging them in ways that they found offensive. Jesus is, in fact, the perfect example of forgiveness. But make no mistake, he upset a lot of people. He called out sin where sin was. And you know, in today's world, if you call out sin, you're going to be considered the bad guy. You're going to be considered narrow-minded, hateful. So I guess, as much as things have changed in 2,000 years, things have not changed that much. We want sometimes to have a Jesus that is milquetoast and mild and loving all the time. And he is loving all the time. But make no mistake, Jesus did not deny the truth of sin. He did not take sin and become complacent with it. He rejected it wherever he saw it. And yes, he upset people. He made them angry. Angry enough, in fact, that they wanted to kill him. We see that in Luke 11, verses 37 through 52. And Jesus is speaking, and a Pharisee had brought him to dinner. It says, while Jesus was speaking, a Pharisee asked him to come dine with him. So he went in and reclined at the table. The Pharisee was astonished to see that he did not first wash his hands before dinner. And the Lord said to him, now you Pharisees cleanse the outside of the cup, of the dish, but inside you're full of greed and wickedness. You fools! Did not he who come outside make inside also? But give as alms those things that were within, and behold, everything is clean in you, for you. But woe to you Pharisees, for you tithe mint, rue, and every herb, and neglect justice and love of God. These you ought to have done without neglecting the others. Woe to you Pharisees, for you love to be the best seat in the synagogues and the greetings in the marketplace. Woe to you, for you are like unmarked graves, and people walk over them without knowing it. One of the lawyers answered him and says, "Teacher, in saying these things, you insult us also." And he said, "Woe to you lawyers also, for you load people with burdens hard to bear, and you yourselves do not touch the burdens with one of your fingers. Woe to you, for you build tombs for the prophets whom your fathers killed. So you are witnesses, and you consent to the deeds of your fathers, for they killed them, and you build their tombs. Therefore also the wisdom of God said, I will send them prophets and apostles, some whom they will kill and persecute, so that the blood of all the prophets shed from the foundation of the world may be charged against this generation. From the blood of Abel to the blood of Zechariah, who perished between the altar and the sanctuary. Yes, I tell you, it will be required of this generation. Woe to you, lawyers, for you have taken away the key of knowledge. You did not enter yourselves, and you hindered those who were entering. I don't know about you, but if I'm sitting at a table and I'm hearing those words directed at me, I'm going to get a little uncomfortable. And Jesus was making a point. The Pharisee was not happy that Jesus did not ritualistically wash his hands. And for a Jew in that day, to ritually wash your hands, you had your water in your hands and you went like this, and then you stood like this and let the water run off your elbows. And that would ritually make you clean. And every Pharisee did it that way every time. Jesus is like, you're playing a game. That does not make you clean. And then the lawyer, seeing that he's beaten up on the Pharisees a little bit, said, hey, careful there. You're getting close to talking about us. And Jesus says, yeah, I don't mean to leave you out. And he proceeds to tell them how much they sin by keeping the law without keeping the intent of the law. You've all seen a mustard seed, if you do any cooking at all. That little bitty piece of mustard seed. You can hardly see it. The good Jewish leader and lawyer would count out 10 of those seeds, and one of those seeds would go to the God. He was that religious about his religion. But what Jesus has said, you count it all out. You even count out that little tenth of mustard seed and say that's for God, but your heart is not there. You don't care for other people. You do not follow the intent that God has given you. Jesus would not pass today because he was not politically correct. And the reason he is not politically correct is, in my estimation, because he loved people too much. Today, it's like, well, if you love me, you'll accept me no matter what I do. If you love me, you will do what I ask you to do, even if it's bad for me. And I think in today's world, we have confused love with neglect. My friends, when a person is doing something that is harmful to themselves or to others, and I, out of the calling and name of love, ignore it or do not deal with it, I am being exactly the wrong thing. I am being unloving. But here's the situation. Which of you would let someone you know is willing to hurt themselves or someone else continue on in that behavior without saying, no, wait, there is another option? Could you consider yourself loving if you allowed that to happen, even though you had opportunity to change it? Jesus is confronting these people not out of anger and hatred, but out of love. Now, the problem is, those religious leaders of Jesus' time could not see their sinful behavior as harmful. In fact, they saw it as being godly. They thought by following a whole slug of little rules, that was going to somehow make them good with God. In today's world, you follow what your feelings are. I hear a lot of folks saying, just do what your heart tells you to do. Just be what you want to be. Don't let other people tell you what should or shouldn't be. Seems like kind words, unless what you want to be is harmful to yourself or others. Jesus refused to not tell people the truth. And in No Questions Asked, Jesus' words today are considered hate speech. And in fact, many places in the world, Christians are being looked at and are charged with hate crimes because they refuse to be open to all the other embracing ideas that are out there. I have never ever been in a situation where someone is told what they're doing is wrong and had them openly embrace it. I mean, I've written a lot of speeding tickets in my life, and rarely, maybe a few tickets, where I hear you know what, you're right, officer, I was speeding, I was wrong, I need a ticket. Instead, you get excuses, you get denials, you get all sorts of ways of saying I justify doing what I do. I actually wrote a county supervisor a ticket for speeding one time, and he hired a very expensive lawyer out of Omaha. I spent three and a half hours on the stand on a speeding ticket, which should usually take about 10-15 minutes. At the end of that testimony, the judge found him guilty. And he stormed out furious, but his attorney came up to me afterwards and congratulated me on an excellent job of testifying. He had done everything he could do to discredit me. 3.5 hours he spent grilling me, tearing me apart, trying to show some gap. And my testimony showed that the case was airtight. And because of that, his arguments failed and his client was found guilty. The religious leaders of Jesus' time were looking for laws and regulations to get them off. And when Jesus came along and says, you know what? Your heart is impure. You're not following God. It offended them. And yes, I'm here to tell you, it is hard to hear when somebody tells you you're wrong. With today's attitude, I hear everything from bigot, haters, radical right-wing terrorists, and just like the lawyer in Jesus' time, people saying, you're offending us. Now, I'm not going to argue that the Bible teaching is offensive to a sinner. There is no two ways around it. The Bible is clear about what sin is and what it is not. And I'm here to tell you, it is hard to admit when you're wrong. But you know what? It is essential for me to recognize my failings. I try never to talk about another person's sin without acknowledging my own. And it's because when I talk about sin taking you to hell, it's because I remember when I too had a reservation for hell. I was and I still am a sinner. And I would like to sometimes forget that. But there is an irony in that. As I said, I issued a lot of tickets as a police officer. But I need to confess, I received a fair share of my tickets also. I had a lead foot. I was as guilty as everyone I ever wrote a ticket to when I was speeding, because I too violated the law. As Christians, I must recognize that we all fall short. None of us are sinless. None of us come before God clean. If I am confronting another sinner, it is with the same mindset to understand I, too, am a sinner. Now, it's always easier to show somebody else their sin. You've always heard that old saying, it's better to give and receive. I can tell you from issuing tickets and receiving tickets that, yes, it's much more fun to give them than it is to receive them. But the truth of it is, they're a sign that you broke a law. You took what man has said was the right speed, and you violated it. And whether you're on the giving or the receiving end is not change the law. It changes how you respond to that law. I must confess that I am a sinner. I must, with all good conscience and love, tell this world who believes they can sin without consequence that there is, unfortunately, a consequence to sin. I know what sin takes us to. Sin leads to hell. There is no two ways about that. The Bible is clear. The penalty for sin is death, which is in fact saying hell. That's the truth. That's the reality. And that, my friends, is why it is so essential to know whether or not I am following God, whether I have received forgiveness by repenting my sin. And like I said, so much of the world today considers this hate speech. So much of this world says you're narrow-minded and bigoted for speaking like that. You're alienating whole groups of society because they're doing what you say is wrong. And I'm here to tell you, I do not say it out of hatred or bigotry or anger. I say it out of love, just as my Savior did. Luke 23, verses 33 through 34. And when they came to the place that is called the Skull, they crucified him, and the criminals on one side of his right hand and one on the left. And Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And they cast lots to divide his garments. Even as Jesus was dying, he showed his love. We as Christians, as we confront a world today that hates our message, is going to consider us hateful and mean, and they're going to reject us. I have to be, with love, constantly reminding myself and everyone else that yes, sin does kill. Sin does destroy. And the penalty for sin is eternity in hell. There is no two ways. There is no way you're going to come before God on that judgment day and get a plea bargain. He's not going to adjudicate you. He's not going to put it up on appeal. You are either guilty of your sin or you have come before the Savior of the world and asked for forgiveness of that sin. However, the world is wanting to reject that attitude. The world's definition is, if it feels good, do it. I get to decide what's right and wrong. No one else does. And if I refuse to acknowledge a God as my creator, then I also refuse to say that he has any rights to tell me what I should do. When I am in that mindset, I will see the glorious love of God as offensive, and I will reject it. But doing so, I repeat the same sin of Satan, who desired to be God. He refused to acknowledge God's authority over him. And I'm here to tell you, my friends, that is the attitude of sin I see today. I am not going to follow some ancient book and some mythical ancient God who gives me rules on how to live my life. I make my own decisions. I get to make that choice. I get to tell you what is right and what's wrong. I go by what I feel. And I'm here to tell you, my friends, that is exactly what Satan said when he rejected God. Now, I would love to tell you that many of those people will see their errors of their way and turn around. But I'll tell you the truth. What the Bible tells me about the end times is that it is not going to be. The Bible is very clear that the way to heaven is very narrow and very few will pass that way. The way to heaven is wide and it is traveled by many. The vast majority of this world is going to reject Jesus Christ. And I'm here to tell you that it is not impossible, even at my age, and I'm up there. So most of my years are behind me. But as a pastor, it will not surprise me to go to jail someday for preaching God's love. And it will be, I'm sure, classified as a hate crime. But I'm here to tell you, just like Jesus, I speak words of love, not hate. I do not tell you that your sin is reprehensible because I hate you and your sin. It's because I hate where that sin is going to take you. I hate the consequence of that sin. And like I said, make no mistake, my reservation in hell was picked up quite early. I chose to reject God for many years of my life. And thus doing, I reserved a place in hell for myself. And when I saw clearly the love of God, I was able to say, no, this is not where I want to go. No, all these things that I thought were my right to do are not. And I'm here to tell you, I can't change the world. I can't change people's hearts. All I can do is emulate Jesus. I will teach you truth. And I'll do it with love. But I will never forget that I too was lost in sin. I will tell you that until the day that Jesus confronted me, that mostly peaceful Jesus, and offered to deliver me from sin, I was offended. When I first was confronted with my sin nature, there's a part of me that said, no, wait a minute. No. You're talking about somebody else, because I basically try to be a nice guy. I try to be good. I try to do the right thing. So when you tell me that I am a sinner, deserving of hell, I got a little bit offended. And you know, the truth of it is, truth is offensive. When I tell you that Adolf Hitler and I both deserved hell, that's offensive, even though it is absolutely true. Both of us sin, both of us fail to recognize God. Now the good news is, I didn't stay there. I saw the love of God that was offered to me, and I says, I want to be off of that track. I no longer want to go down that wide road. I want forgiveness. I want to change my ways. I don't want to live the life I used to live. And while I was offended at the idea that somehow I, a good person, was a guilty sinner, the more I saw, the more I understood, the more I realized that yes, I was and still am. I cannot stand before you today and pretend like the Pharisees that I am some kind of holy guy. You'll notice I don't wear robes or collars. I want no pretense to suggest that I am in any way, shape, or form different than any other person in this congregation. I struggle with sin just like everyone here. And I will continue to struggle with sin as long as I live. The difference is, I know a man that can set me free from my guilt, from the temptations. He can set me free from that reservation I have in hell. My friends, Jesus is a loving God. And he loves you too much to let you continue in destructive, sinful behavior. He wants you to see him as the Redeemer he is. He will deliver us from our sin, and he will prepare us for a place in heaven. But make no mistake, that is an offensive statement. To say that I'm not good enough, many will find offensive. Because one of the first things to accept Christ is that I have to admit my guilt. My friends, as you look at the message of Jesus Christ, you will either find the love of God the most offensive thing in the world, or the most overwhelmingly generous, loving thing in the world. God leaves it for you to decide how you will take that. And I will tell you that yes, being told I'm a sinner is offensive, but being released of that sin and forgiven of that sin because my God loved me so much to die for me, my friends, my offenses disappears, because with that love, I see the cleansing nature that God desires for me. And you know what? I look forward to the day where I kneel before him and I sing praises to his name because of his great love. Because he loved me enough to offend me. The question is, my friends, do we love the world around us enough to offend them? To tell them that there is a wrong way, and if they're not careful, they can in fact reject God without even realizing it. It's a question we need to consider today, especially in this day's world. Thank you.